Going on the fault checker and Didn't it's just happened for today, Shawnee. Thank you so much for being here today, for having me start the panel. It's an honour. It's a topic that's of great interest to me and activists and my family as well. So I think when we think about the climate crisis, we hear a lot about targets and about data centres, technology, SDGs, don't start me, and what individuals should do. What we hear less of and what we don't hear really is actually power and like who's making those decisions, who's gaining from it, and that's what we're going to kind of focus on today. We're not here to moralise or offer easy answers or anything. We're just here to have an open discussion, and I suppose the golden thread throughout this whole Scoil is decolonisation. So throughout the course of this conversation, we will touch on partition, class, clothing legacies, resistance, and what it might look like to build something a wee bit different. So I'm delighted to be joined by our speakers today. First, at the end, we've got Lynda Sullivan. Lynda is a writer, activist, campaigner, and organiser whose work is rooted in environmental justice. We've got Seán Mac Bradaigh, a community and human rights activist, member of Dream Dearg, and organiser with the community garden Gáirdín and Phobail. August Peter Doran, and Peter is a lecturer in environmental law and sustainable development in Queens, and a writer and researcher as well. So thank you again for being here, and we'll move through probably a few different things this afternoon. But I'm going to start by asking everybody the same question, and I suppose it kind of is a little bit about your own work, obviously, and how you brought that here, but what was it that first got you interested or involved in climate action and climate justice, and what's kept you there?
So I suppose I started off as like a bit of a do-gooder, that sort of like Catholic charity sort of vibe, and I did a master's in international development with the view of like working for like an aid agency and helping poor people around the world, like that kind of idea. And then, but actually during my master's, and the people that I met there were from all over the world, really rooted in like justice and equity, and like really looking at the systemic reason for poverty and injustice. So I learned a lot from them, more so than in the classes, and then that really made me reconsider my whole worldview. And so then I decided then to go into human rights. So I worked for a few years in human rights, and when I was with Amnesty, these women from Guatemala came to visit, and they had been affected by mining. Their community was destroyed by mining. One of the women's husbands was murdered because he was a community leader. For some reason, their story just really impacted me. I suppose is that like, person to person, human story, rather than just like reading and learning about it. So that got me into mining and the effects of mining, the devastation that mining can bring. So a few years later, I decided to go to Latin America and experience, like just visit communities that were affected by mining across the continent. So I traveled through, like Argentina and Chile and Bolivia and Peru with the idea of like ending up in Guatemala. But when I got to Peru, there was a conflict going on, the campesino community in the Northern Highlands, Cajamarca. It was the biggest conflict on the continent at that time. The biggest gold producer in the world was attempting to destroy 4 mountain lakes and the water source for millions of people. So I decided to stay. I was doing a bit of writing and reporting as I went along, so I decided to stay and like report on the conflict for a few weeks. And 5 years later, I was still there and didn't quite make it to Guatemala. But yeah, so that like experience of living alongside the campesino communities in Peru and their struggle against this mining corporation was not only like based in human rights, but also like the rights of the earth, the rights of communities. And like, yeah, it was just more like, and I suppose I was influenced as well by their cosmovision, you know, how they viewed the earth and how they related to the earth, and everything's alive and everything's family, you know, so that, yeah, deeply impacted me. And then I decided to come back home and got involved in, well, actually when I was in Peru, I learned about the mining that was happening here in Ireland. I was connected to the communities in the Fearons. So when I got back home then, I got involved with, the communities in the Fearons resisting a proposed mega gold mine there, and I've been involved with them ever since. I worked for Friends of the Earth for a few years, like supporting other communities and their campaigns against extractivism and also climate justice. Just since then, now I coordinate with a global anti-mining network, Yes to Life, No to Mining, and also I'm involved with, we created an all-island network, Communities Against the Injustice of Mining, bringing communities all around the island together to support each other. So yeah, I've kind of like focused on mining, but you know, it's part of the whole climate justice picture, and I can kind of go into that a wee bit later, but so that was my story.
Thank you so much. And it's obviously like the international development piece is so important because we cannot divorce climate crisis from the rise of refugees seeking asylum and the rise of racism. Like everything is so interconnected. And I'll come to you, Seán, just your kind of background and how you came to this work.
Yeah, so like in a way, like something that putting it in a box, calling claims activism and that kind of thing is a relatively new phenomenon in my life, but probably not really, in that we've been sort of interwoven with the environment around us from the day and hour we were born, and through the people that have sort of taught us as we've grown. So like I'm looking in the room and seeing Brendy O'Fee and Fergal McEnrickey, and like you've two different bits of story there. Terry Enright on the one hand, organising against a mine on the mountain for a long time and organising us as kids in that framework and environment, like us going up early doors up the mountains as part of the school trips to the edge of the quarry to shout at the bad fucking men who were stealing the mountain, you know, that kind of stuff. And Terry kept it simple, and probably the story hasn't changed. You ask me, who's to blame? The Brits, you know what I mean? But, you know, and it's not, you don't need to really expand on it too much, but beyond that, you know what I mean? It's fairly straightforward. And then allegedly Brendan O'Fee and Scoil agus in College to Shaw agus Fitcha Fucha Listen Gael culture, interwoven with the Irish language movement. We have this deep piece of poetry that connects us to an age-old struggle about preserving our land, you know what I mean? And not preserving our land for exploitation, but preserving it as just part of your, you know, part of yourself and part of your soul. So it's the Idihaswormage le Brendy and that sort of the mythology of Ireland, the storytelling, the understanding that the Brehon law system and all of that revere. I mean, we come from we're a forest people now without a forest, you know what I mean? We're an island people with an island under attack, and we're, you know, them things are obviously, they were seeds, you know what I mean? And then spent a bit of time in organising, community organising, with lots of different things. You start like organising with ex-prisoners in Costa and around jobs and employment and access to employment, organising in the trade union movement around a whole range of different struggles there, and then spent about a decade or more organising with PPR, the human rights organisation. Lynda's on the board of PPR. People peppered all over the place here. Conal never misses an opportunity too. As soon as I come in the door, he whipped my jumper off and put this t-shirt on me. Says you're doing the talk on that t-shirt, so check that campaign out. But so through all that weave, and then sort of there's like they're the parents. All those people are the parents of Gáirdín and Phobail. And Gáirdín and Phobail is a grassroots collective organising around one particular space, but now more spaces to basically reconnect people with land, kids and schools and local people and internationals, sort of really coming and connecting again with land, growing food, producing stuff, asking ourselves what we need, asking who has power, and developing sort of techniques and tactics to go in and like to interact with all of that.
Brilliant, yeah, brilliant. I also spent my summers as a child climbing mountains in the south of Ireland, so I had the birds too.
Sorry, Doran.
Peter, I'll come to you just with the same question and we'll get into the themes.
Sure. Seán used the word weeding. I love that word, and we're hearing much more of that word in terms of how we effect change. And for me, I guess my identity and my first kinship and sense of belonging comes from my birth in Donegal in Mount Charles. So I sort of the deep connection and sense of kinship has been formative, and I've been weaving that sense of belonging and love and passion into all of the experiences that have followed. So there's a number of formative experiences. I grew up in Derry in a very political or politicized, radicalized household where I suppose the struggle was very international. It was always cast in the larger struggles, context for decolonization and liberation, and especially the liberation theology traditions in Latin America. So there's a connection there with Lynda. And then I would also say that the other big influence on me was a very early exposure to Zen Buddhism, which is a deeply relational spirituality. That we can never really say in Buddhism or Zen, I am, without referring to otherness, not only other people, but the other species, the other being that we inter-are and inter-be. So again, weaving that into my work, even as a scholar and a writer, and more recently weaving that sense of being in the world, being with, into the campaign for the rights of nature. And again, locating the rights of nature, the rights of Ireland, Misha Era, weaving that understanding into the new phase of decolonisation, which extends our vision of liberation to the land itself and to our ways of relating to the land as a living presence. So those are the main points.
Thank you. So interesting. I was actually just the other day chatting to a friend about in like the Maori culture. I'm sure you'll be aware of this, Peter, but when land is returned, it's not returned to the people. It belongs then to the land itself. Like the land is an entity in and of itself. It has its own rights, which is such a brilliant and beautiful way to look at it. Lynda, I'll start with you, just on your kind of experience of mining around the world and your interest in it. And obviously, the thing on everybody's lips at the minute is the geopolitical chaos and madness that we're kind of living in, and a lot of that is kind of centered around gaining access to so-called critical minerals to kind of probably fund our lifestyles in the West and feed, I suppose, consumerism and greed and all of that. But I suppose, how critical are they, and ultimately who pays the price? And you'll have seen this firsthand.
Yeah, I've written about this better than I can probably explain it. So, but anyway, so yeah, like I think critical minerals is the new fossil fuels. You know, it's like it's what's fueling the system. Well, actually, you know, fossil fuels hasn't gone away either. Like fossil fuels is still, increasing. But now, I suppose it's like the easy way to solve the climate crisis is to just decarbonize. To decarbonize, we just need to electrify everything, you know? So it's like, just electrify all the cars, electrify all our energy system, electrify just everything. So it's like business as usual, but just, you know, changing the fuel source. But to do that, that requires like minerals. And so it's like this now, this craze, over who has access to the minerals, who can extract them, and so I suppose the US and Europe have realized that like China has been secretly doing this for a long time, and so now it's this like scramble to catch up. So that's what's like, obviously it's not the only thing behind all the geopolitical madness at the minute, but it's a key element of it, like a scramble for these minerals. And it's cloaked in green, it's cloaked in, the answer to solving the climate crisis. But really where most of these minerals are going is not for renewable energy, it's for the arms trade. Like a huge chunk goes to the arms trade. It also goes to fuel billionaires going to space, and also obviously the mass unsustainable consumer culture, which also, as we talked about, it's not about individual blame. Like this culture is deliberately stoked and brought into being by this manipulative advertising, and like the things that we had, like it's like if you say you're resistant mining, the answer is always like, but you have a phone, but you have a laptop, it's like, well, those laptops are made to break in 2 years, you're made to think that you need a new phone every year. So it's like the whole system is completely deliberately unsustainable, so then they can keep on mining more and producing more and throwing more out, who suffers? Like the people who are at the forefront of where this extraction takes place. So I was in Indonesia a couple of years ago, and on the island of Sulawesi, and Indonesia, the island of Sulawesi has the world's biggest nickel reserves. And so the island of Sulawesi is basically being converted into like a hellscape for nickel mining. And the people there obviously are suffering, and the environment is suffering. Like mining contaminates water, it contaminates the land, it destroys communities, it devastates. So it's not just Sulawesi, all across Latin America, mostly the global south, but also the peripheries of the global north. So Ireland is a sacrifice zone for mining. 25% of the whole island is concessioned already to mining companies. We have the biggest zinc mine in Europe in Navan, in County Meath, and if you see like Auchternish Alumina, the bauxite processing plant is on the banks of the Shannon. It's just like an environmental disaster waiting to happen. Mining produces so much waste, and that waste has to go somewhere. So it goes into these tailing ponds, and they are like a forever problem. Once the mine's finished and the company goes away, like they're going to fail, and then the people are going to pay the price, and the state obviously has to try, but it's impossible to kind of deal with these things. So I think we need to look at who suffers and who's being sacrificed and for what. It's definitely not for the climate, it's for profit and it's for power. So
And like a couple of things to kind of tease out there on the video next, and we'll get into it again. I suppose like the rise of consumerism, I've noticed definitely that I think it's increased rapidly since COVID. I don't know if that has been like a driver or because everybody was sitting at home, but in the last few years, I've never seen so many Jeeps on the road. Like I obviously live in the countryside, and like cars just going to pass each other, that barely happens anymore. And like the amount of even clothes waste that Ireland produces every year, like I think Irish people produce like 53 kilograms of clothes every single year. That's crazy. We produce so much waste. I just think consumerism has gotten really out of hand. But you also see kind of the geopolitical effects of that in terms of what you mentioned about war and this kind of extractive and colonial mindset. And I think, as Peter, I'll come to you now, we've kind of, I think more and more we're coming to understand the climate crisis in the context of colonialism and as a result of that. And I wonder what you think about how like Ireland's place in that, and what like, our history tells us, and what we can learn from it.
Sure. I think it's really useful to think about the where ideas come from, where our understandings of our relationships with one another our relationships to the land, and how we've come to, in a very exceptional way, as part of a kind of a Western system, with its histories of empire, colonialism, extractivism, that the relationships and the values that we've inherited are such that we regard and relate to the earth as essentially what the philosopher Heidegger called standing reserve. The earth has been translated into a storehouse of things and objects for extraction, production, consumption, disposal in most cases. One of the philosophers of colonialism, Cesar, described colonialism as essentially a process of thingification, reducing the world to a series of things. And this is also how colonialism and empire comes to regard people, and through the extraction of labour and the imposition of our roles as labourers in the machine, the capitalist machine, we come to be valued primarily through our contributions to production. So the histories of capitalism, the histories of colonialism and empire have given rise to this system or culture that we call modernity, with its privileged, it privileges technology, it privileges radical individualism, it privileges levels of comfort and expectations around, getting from A to B with least resistance. But most fundamentally, at the core of the European modern experience is the inculcation of this sense that we float above the earth, that we're not entangled with the earth, that we are fallen angels of another realm, and that we owe no debt, that we're not deeply identified with the earth and nature. And the phases of colonialism, just to end the point, take many different forms. During the history of colonialism in Ireland, we were a template for the translation of the landscape into productive lands for export and the modern technologies that are applied to the landscapes and the economies that go with that. But phases of colonialism also have taken on a new dimension, which is probably one of the biggest threats to our ability to respond to it. And that is the colonization of our attention. The forces of mass distraction, where we're not short of information, we are flooded with information, most of it useless. And it's there to distract us, to keep us consuming, to keep us imagining that our way of being on the earth is to extract, enjoy, and dispose, rather than relate, love, cherish, belong, and connect. I think those are the choices before us.
And through your work with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, like what you just named are basically the pillars of well-being, connecting to nature being one of the main things, and obviously the mass distraction that we're seeing kind of takes away from it.
That's right. I'm involved in it's a global network of activists and academics and policy community who are challenging the central economic narrative, really the central narrative of capitalism, so that we begin to redesign and cultivate an economy that is in the service of people and the service of planet, rather than us being at the service of capitalist logic. And very few people who benefit from the growth of that system, of course. So the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is active across the island. We have communities of practice involving policy people and academics, but we're also working very closely with artists and writers, theatre, to mobilise an understanding that this is not just a cognitive policy debate, it's about who we are, how we want to belong. There's a wonderful Nigerian philosopher, Akinolapi, who says that capitalism is not just an economic system or a technical system or a cultural system, it's a sensorium that captivates and colonizes all of our senses. And we need, that's resistance is so personal as well as structural in this moment.
And Seán, I'll come to you. Like a lot of your work is kind of grounded in dealing with people and their everyday realities around food and land and dignity and housing. And how do we connect the climate struggle to class struggle at a moment in time that we've heard about earlier, that we'll hear about later, with rising fascism, disinformation, rising inequality, and how do we kind of make that relevant to people already living in poverty, like dealing with reality and the consequences of all those things?
Yeah, I'm going to caveat by letting people know that we were asked would there be good questions in advance, and I thought there were questions for other people than myself, right? So now I've been hit up with a question that I posed that I don't have the answer to. so I mean, all I can say is talk to the experiences that I personally have organising in this city and interacting with groups and people in the room here and around the area and all of that. And I think in terms of how to make, the reason why I asked the question about class, connecting with class struggle, is that we have a lot of patronising stuff within the sort of climate activist realm that tells people that their behavioural choices, if only their behavioural choices could be modified slightly to eat more of this more expensive food and eat more, that is not cognizant of objective reality. It's not cognizant of how people are eating out of Tesco's. Or in this area, like there's a food bank every square mile. And people are eating out of food banks, and they're eating out of food banks that Sainsbury's are donating to, and in an environment where we have plenty of land that could well feed them, But if we're not making connections between the whole thing, if you were looking to give lectures in a food bank to someone about how their food system is part of the problem and their behaviour needs to modify to change that, you get told, you get told where to go very quickly by people who are living in extreme poverty. So for me, we'll have to constantly be finding methods, techniques, to organise with our communities and our communities who are suffering most. And the way to do that is to listen first and not talk, To find out what's going on, what's needed, what's wanted, what's capacity exists and all that. So, and that's part of what we're doing with the Gáirdín and Phobail thing. We're trying to listen to find out, where are the gaps in the local food system where you can start to move and shake around education and learning and reclaiming land and space and turning out, even the simplest act of someone learning for the first time how to grow vegetable, the kids who come to Gáirdín and Phobail from Bunscoil, Slavagiv and Gaelscoil Nawal and Bunscoil Phobail First, and the Sinclairs who come to Four Spring Garden. Like, these are kids that over the last few years have come from, obviously, families disconnected with the land, like all of our families, don't know where spuds or carrots or beets or leeks or anything come from, and then go through a process of actually doing it and creating the miracle of food, through cultivation, but these are young people, kids in our communities who are going and doing a process of what I see as deep decolonisation, reconnecting the land and coming out the side of it with a miracle of a carrot, even if you only get a carrot each, one carrot, it's a major step. And as well, that can only be an educational resource. We don't have yet enough access to enough land and enough resources to think about things and also to connect with it in a way of not just exploiting it, but to connect with it as a preservation sort of initiative. We don't have, that isn't there yet, but the education resources there, and that's what Gáirdín and Phobail and the other spaces where we're organised, what we're trying to do is sort of rekindle a connection with where your food comes from, where your resources come from, how it gets used and organised and thrown away or not. And these wee spaces of learning where you can also then create proximity between people of different class, different race, different, the whole gambit, and that fusion can start to create a different sense of how communities can interact with the environment around them. But it has to have ideology too, you know what I mean? I think you have to be really honest about the fact that you're involved in an ideological act here, you know what I mean? And it is counter-capitalism, and it is counter-imperialism, and it is counter-exploitation, and it's counter-consumerism, and it's, you know what I mean? It has to be ideology in this stuff.
And also being connected to our language.
And listen, and then the deepest root that we have on this island, the deepest connection we can possibly have to wisdom from the past of how to live with the world around you is the language that we still have, you know what I mean? The language and the poetry and the song within it that weaves backwards into a culture that we're trying to bring up into the present here. And that's what like Indigenous struggles all over the world are doing, you know what I mean? They're bringing forward a wisdom that has been lost and left peppered in guilt huts and school systems and blah, blah, blah. And they're bringing that wisdom into the present against the weight of trillion-dollar patriarchal imperialist industries, you know what I mean? So it's a fucking serious struggle, like, you know what I mean? Like, with serious battle on our hands, but dig where you stand and start where you are in the world is a challenge, you know what I mean?
Just, I'll tease that out a wee bit and come back to you, Lynda. Well, my first thought there was that's very good of Sainsbury's when their CEO makes a lot of grand an hour, but anyway. I think like just to tease that out, like we talked about this a little bit before, like, but what you're doing literally is kind of decolonisation in action, or like in communities, like on the ground, and like organising in communities is like the only way that we're going to win. And it's just like the importance of it can't be understated. And I just like tease it out a little bit about organising. Like, are there lessons that we have learned or that we can learn from other movements? Like we mentioned BDS before. Or like from what you guys are doing, like how could we replicate that in other parts of the island?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like we've got in my view, we've got two strands of organising we need to look at. One is the organising in the positive, which is creating places and spaces, activating, getting part of rewilding, getting hundreds of kids involved in bringing trees, growing trees and bringing them up the mountain, and doing that in ways that are actually complementary to the ecosystem and aren't just ticking a box for Belfast City Council's 1 million trees initiative that'll kill 1 million trees. No, so initiatives that are building, as well as initiatives that are divesting. We have to find methodologies that we're going to divest from capitalist, imperialist, exploitative culture. You know what I mean? And I think the best example and the most powerful that we've seen in our recent memory is the BDS movement, like the Palestinian struggle for the Palestinian resistance movement. You know what I mean? Like, they're the poorest, most oppressed people on earth have built a global network of divestment from the machinery of capital and exploitation that is driving their own destruction, and they're doing it from bombed out fucking, doing it. I mean, so if those people can raise like that and put the heart in a movement across a planet that is divesting from pension funds and is throwing away the Coca-Colas and is, creating major dents in their money, because that's all about, that's their power. If that's their source of power, what is it that we're doing in all of our individual actions, our family actions and our community actions that are making that divestment happen? And then we'll have to be honest with ourselves too. Like, there's millions more. Some people are privileged enough they can take a lot more actions than others. And there's also steps that we can take that just seem inconvenient at the moment, and we're not, you know what I mean? And inconvenience is not a big enough of an excuse not to take action against the weight of the problems that we're facing and the problems that we're leaving for our kids, you know what I mean? Like, I know it's difficult to not go on this app and that app and it'd be so inconvenient. Inconvenience is a fucking weak excuse, like, for making steps that need to be made to divest from the machinery that's killing us, you know what I mean? And we're going to have to do it. There's going to have to be an awakening, like, at the level and at the scale of the BDS movement and greater again.
And like Lynda, you would have seen, I suppose, the realities of some of that in your international work, and like how those communities are the most affected by what Seán was just saying. I suppose, have you seen any good examples of that in like of successes, or how we can kind of shift the responsibility, the story and the responsibility away from people and communities themselves, and like split that responsibility with systems of power? Have any examples or?
Yeah, so, well, I could just say what Seán said. He said he's going to say that, but like, it's not trying to get the system to assume responsibility. It's like realizing that we have the power, you know, so then it's like dismantling those systems of power. Because, yeah, they're not going to change. You know, the Yes Life No Mining Network, like, we're at the COP30 talks in Belém in Brazil in November, and well, our main focus of being there was the People Summit, but we also like participated in the talks themselves, and like, it just like, if it wasn't clear before, it's completely clear now that, you know, world governments are not going to save us. The industry is not going to save us. You know, the talks completely failed, as, you know, they were intending to do, you know. So like, yeah, it's just, we just have to realise that the power lies in us. And, you know, as Seán was saying, like, we need to find every way to, like, yeah, divest from that power and tear it down, you know. So, so yeah, like my time in Cajamarca in Peru, like that is my source of hope, because those campesinos in the Northern Highlands, like, did win their fight against the most powerful gold mining company in the world, you know, and that was by really amazing organising, like really, really strong community organising. Like, they have a system called the Rondas Campesinas, which is you know, like an autonomous justice organisation, where they organise in each community to be their own, justice system. The state kind of abandoned them, but, you know, it's probably for the best anyway. So they, on the top of that real, like, embedded network, they then have organised the resistance against extractive industries, and it's worked very well. You know, they put their bodies on the line, and people have died, people were killed resisting these projects. They're criminalised as well, ever more like intense criminalisation. But, you know, the alternative is a slow or not so slow death. You know, so yeah, the courage and the strength of their resistance is, yeah, like what I hold as an example. And obviously it's here too, you know, it's here, like, across the city, it's here in West Belfast, it's here in the Sperrins, you know, like, yeah, you know, it sounds a bit twee, but like, the people are the answer. And that's what came out of the People Summit as well in Brazil. Social movements across Brazil and the world, you know, making connections, like connecting struggles, building power, and that's what needs to continue. And yeah, it needs to be happening in every community. You know, food sovereignty, democratic workspaces, you know, like, so cooperatives. Like, we need to find any and all ways to break the system, but also build the alternative at the same time, you know. And yeah, like, the no is clear. We all know what the no is, you know. It's no to colonialism, capitalism, the patriarchy, imperialism. But the yes can be, like, as the Zapatistas say, you know, a world where many worlds fit. Like, we don't need to agree on this one future vision, because that's what's got us into this trouble, you know, imposing vision on others. So it's like, yeah, let's, like, you know, let's open our vision, let's, like, be as inclusive as possible, as, you know, whatever. There are many futures, but not the one that we're currently in, because that's going to kill us. You know?
And just to pick up on one word you used there, which is hope, and like that is the thing that's missing at the minute. But I've been reading Rebecca Solnit recently, and it's kind of this concept of hope as a radical act almost, and how if hope is dangerous to the people who are, you know, milking us at the minute, and
Yeah.
like hope, it's not something that we wait for, that we do. Like hope is a practice, and what that looks like in our world, and like in reality, is actually organising and people taking action for themselves, and like wanting something different for them and for their families, and it's so powerful to know that there's examples all over the world that's not happening, and like, solidarity is so important in that.
Yeah. And I think, like, you know, like, and it's hard to say, you know, just we can't despair, but you shouldn't be despairing, because obviously the world is in a really shitty place. But like, despair is also a luxury, because, you know, if you're in like the Palestinians, like, you know, they don't have the luxury of despair. They're organising, they're resisting. You know, like if we're sitting thinking, oh, the world's gonna go to shit, and you know, there's nothing to do about it. But like, we can always make it better, even if it gets more and more shit. There's always actions to make it better, you know. And despair just feeds the system, because despair and apathy, you know. And it's like, and also it's a wee bit arrogant, because it's like, well, we don't know what's going to happen, you know. And the shifts that the world has seen, like, it can be tidal shifts, you know. And so it's like to say that I know the answer of what's going to happen, you know, is kind of, yeah, like a wee bit arrogant. So it's like, you know, well, let's work together to make something different happen, but not like assume that we're all doomed, kind of thing.
And Peter, I'll go back to you, and like we all know the answer to this, but it's just quite it's like, can we actually achieve the kind of world or the kind of economy and society that we need without a radical overhaul of our approach to economic policy, and like challenging that dominant economic narrative? And also, it's just to caveat that, like, can we do that on a partitioned island? I don't think anyone in this room thinks so, but like, I feel like we can't have that conversation without also bringing in partition.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. But I think you used the phrase, and I was about to use the similar phrase, and it's about hope, or radical hope, or active hope as practice. That sometimes, especially those of us from a left tradition, we approach the future a little bit like almost like a religious sense. You know, we have a teleology, we know where we're going to go to, and we'll do almost anything to get there, but we don't taste, we don't prefigure, we don't have a sense that we're anticipating day to day in our practice. And I think the challenge for radical movements, and what we're seeing in movements like the one that Lynda is involved with, Joanna Macy and others, that they talk about hope and teach hope as a practice, and testing the deep assumptions that we bring to our activism as well, because a lot of activism, a lot of the promises of change are themselves compromised by the system. Especially the climate response, is a lot of it's about managing and control, but actually all of that is borrowed from the existing system. On the point of partition, yeah, I think the greatest tragedy for the new Ireland, the greatest tragedy for the final push towards decolonising the island and ridding ourselves of the coloniality that continues to occupy institutions in Dublin as well as Belfast and the economy. But the greatest tragedy would be for us to prepare and to design and imagine an Ireland that is rooted in the ruin of the capitalist system. You know, and we have to anticipate and I think make the vision of New Ireland compelling, universally compelling, by naming the ways in which there will be a convergence, both constitutionally, but also a convergence of questions over the dominant economic and political systems as well. You know, we're facing multiple transitions, and we can't wait until the referendum. I think we have to anticipate, sow the seeds now, re-engage with our sense of place now. Lynda used a lovely phrase, by the way, which should be part of the preparation for the new republic: cosmo-localist. Every attempt now to question the deep structures, these planetary global structures, has a counterpart in our most intimate connections with our neighbours, our local landscape, and our local practice, and how we cultivate and regenerate the land in our own neighbourhoods and villages and towns and cities. There's no separation between the consequences of what we do in our gardens, our allotments, our community-assisted agricultural systems, and the questions we bring to the structure and the preparations we make for the new island. It's about liberating the land as well as the people, to know.
And just on liberating the land, like, we can't be here and not even mention Lough Neagh, which is the largest body of water in Ireland, that is owned by some Marin in England. And yeah, I know you're involved in campaign.
I mean, one opportunity I'd love, Doran and Mona and others to be really engaged in the Lough Neagh conversation, because some of us, Lynda and others, have planted the seed for radical possibility around the future governance of Lough Neagh. There's a fascinating colonial history there that can become a parable of transformation and liberation. Those of us who are arguing for not just a transfer of ownership of the loch from the Earl of Shaftesbury, who has become a bit of a friend and an interlocutor. He's not a bad guy, actually. I hope I'm not allowed to say that. But anyway, what I was going to say is the possibilities for decolonising our imaginary around Lough Neagh are immense, and could actually they could prefigure and anticipate some of the conversations we want to have around the new island, because it's not just about a transfer of ownership from the Earl of Shaftesbury. It's potentially about the transformation of our very idea of ownership, because decolonisation, this enclosing the loch, is actually about restoring the commons, about restoring a deep kinship, a sense of belonging and collective responsibility around the loch and the catchment and the bioregion, never mind the water. So there are great possibilities. Some of us have been sowing the seeds of those conversations, and that we would invite you, I think, to really weigh in there and see it as an opportunity to prefigure the kind of Ireland we want to emerge, liberated beyond the referendum.
I think we'll maybe take some questions from the floor, and probably don't have a whole pile of time left, but we'll see where we get.
A question for Seán. Well, thanks very much for that. I suppose when I think about the constitutional question and bringing protections in the law, really that's just codifying relationships that exist already. So we can't wait for that moment to actually introduce something new to this. But I was thinking about Gáirdín football, and I've had the pleasure and the privilege of doing a wee bit of work with them, not actually getting my hands dirty, like doing flip charts and shit, But it just strikes me that with Gáirdín football, the only thing restricting you is resources, land, more money. That those spaces that you've developed in Gáirdín football, the kind of satellite sites, are certainly kind of spaces of education right now, but clearly evolving into something more that could be nascent forms of production and distribution that are separate. So when you're talking about divesting from certain parts of industry, there needs to be replaced by something else. And that's what my question is, has Gáirdín football thought or started to think about how do you start building that kind of alternative forms of production distribution at a very localized level to start with?
So he knows only he knows the answer to that question, and he's going to see if I do.
Thank you.
I mean, as you know from facilitating some of the conversations that have basically brought this network of people together, there's lots of really good thought on how we can be involved in our own sort of fabrication and industry and all of that. And it's rooted, I mean, this is again rooted in like Gael struggle, like, you know what I mean? Like Ballymurphy Industries existed in the 60s, was developed by the Irish language movement, you know what I mean? These new, what may seem like new economic models and new playbooks are old stories too, you know. So the capacity for localized economies, localized industry, localized fabrication, localized creation, localized education, all of that capacity and resource and actually piloting those ideas have been done, and you know, and we sometimes have to look back to look forward on that too. So I can easily imagine the re-emergence of Ballymurphy Industries at a higher scale, of candle works and wool works, and you know, all of the, like, you can easily see the threads connecting all them to the future. And then even just to talk about some of the stuff that you were talking about, like operationalising decolonisation so that the Earl of Shaftesbury no longer has a say in how our resources are used. I see the operationalising of that happening already through Glordamona, through the work that Niall's doing on the hills, through the hills themselves are the water source for the loch, and they run through the farmers and the landowners that live in their circle, and we're organising in those communities to change them relationships and change those power dynamics so that those farmers, if they want a nice path off from bad industry to good industry, we need to find it for them. If they don't want a nice path off and they just don't want to be nice guys, then we'll find a way to compost them. And I'm only like, we'll not do that. Like, you know what I mean? That'd be terrible. But you know what I mean? We need the nascent industry is there, and it lacks resource in terms of money and materials, but also the answers and the solutions are too. Like the people sitting around you who have leveraged massive resource into these projects. You know what I mean? Who have leveraged money, who have leveraged wood and compost and soil and this and that, you know what I mean? So we need to find a new way of doing our wee economy at this scale, and I think we've got all wee bits and bobs, and someone with better writing skills than me maybe needs to codify it and start sort of running how we're doing recruitment, retention, training, passing on, learning and activating other sites and replication and stuff.
I was going to ask you earlier, like, who's holding us back and why is it the Ulster Farmers Union, but you've kind of got into it already.
Oh, they're bad boys, they agree. There's another one for the compost.
Any other questions from the floor?
Well, first of all, thank you for a fascinating talk. But it seems implicitly and explicitly you're saying that you're asking for radical, revolutionary change, really. And the context here that I'm talking about was I went to a climate conference that was organised by the Irish Christian churches and all the main church leaders there. And it was very obvious it was a very controlled and choreographed exercise in greenwashing. And there was going to be no mention of capitalism, no mention of militarism, no mention of war, certainly no mention of genocide in Palestine. And there was 3 women there that did try to raise it, and when the third one stood up, she got thrown out by a minister. So it does seem that there's a time frame. We don't have a lot of time, do we really? If you look at say the nuclear clock, 86 seconds, and this is something there to look at in the anti-nuclear movement that became global, that was very, very effective because people could see, they could clearly, easily see the nuclear war means annihilation. That's the end of us. And I think in the global south, as you said, Lynda, there is a sense, because they're really feeling the brunt of it, but there isn't here. And the forces that we're up against, we saw how they crushed the left, and we're still living with the consequences of that. So, exactly going back again to what you said, Lynda, that they will criminalise climate activists the way that they have criminalised Palestinian activists, and they will call them terrorists. Is that your future, and how are you going to overcome it?
Jump in. Just like solidarity is a big one. Yeah, and I'm just going to take this moment to mention that Brian has put. Brian, do you want to talk about it? And then
there's circulating a petition, so just to talk about internationalism solidarity and meeting connections. So Lynda was on a call a couple of days ago with the family, and we met and it was a Phobail, Doran who was out with us, and with the pleasure of spending time with Tiny, who's a Mapuche leader. And it was interesting, he prayed for us the whole time he was there in their own way, you know, with the prayer that we've been safe, prayed for the safe passage, prayed that the workshops would be carried out successfully. And yeah, for the whole group, and then went back, and his son is very unsafe at the minute, so his son's 20. And the 23-year-old have been detained by special in Chile using the Anti-Terrorism Act for the first time. And so he's been detained, could face 20 to 40 years in prison. The state's got 5 years to investigate the crime charges against them. And what they're guilty of is defending their ancestral territory against a multinational weapon company. So it's condition more around just like the opportunity of raising it. Because again, on a personal level, you know, we had that connection with the father, who now is, you know, 4 hours away from his son, who's been restricted from being in prison with other political prisoners, so been isolated, waterboarded, tortured, and we're campaigning. And I suppose the urgency is that the new government coming into Chile is pro-Pinochet, and the Minister of Justice changes on the 11th of March. The current Minister is a Communist Party member. We're trying to get in touch with him to at least investigate what takes place in the prison. So we appreciate this. This will go directly to the family as well, and for the young people know that they're not alone. So thanks to them.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's just like one way, and there's many ways of supporting the family and other people who are criminalised, who are resistant. But yeah, so like we can't, like we can do our best to like, you know, resist and also support others who are suffering because of their resistance. And yeah, we need to internationalise our struggles. Yeah, it is like a hard like reality, but without solidarity and without supporting each other, you know, it's going to be so much harder. So yeah.
Do you think, I mean, the Palestinian movement is now global and it's very strong. The community closer links than that between genocide and ecocide, that they can be so clearly linked with what we see in Gaza.
Yeah. Yeah, well, ecocide has been very deliberately caused in Gaza as well as part of the genocide, you know, to ensure that Palestinian people can survive on their land, you know, and because the waters have been deliberately contaminated, the land has been deliberately destroyed, you know, so that they go hand in hand, you know, destroying the land, you're destroying the people's ability to survive on the land, you know, so and in other parts of the world as well, you know, it's a playbook. So yeah, and like we are part of nature, so ecocide, you know, and genocide, it's destroying our life support systems, you know, and yeah, so.
So I do find, what I find is actually what we're talking about, it's very hard to change because what they're doing is they're going after the individual. You know, like you said about solidarity and coming together, but we are like literally, you said we're on this kind of journey now. You have to hold on to hope, but we need to drastically get change. Like you said, it's drastic now. It's imperative that we get change out, but it's harder now because of the way our governments are going against, like, you know, if you protest, you're putting one person in prison, and you get fighting for not supporting family if you go into prison. So we're in a really bad time. But I suppose the only way to get out of that is through community. You know, and being together in a group, a tight group, because they're going after the individual. So yeah, protesting. Or you're saying too much, you could be blacklisted from into a certain country, you know, or I mean, it is a hard.
Yeah, totally.
The answer to that is community and organising and being together and like combating individualism, which has been kind of on the rise by design and kind of felt freedom. So, we're going to wrap up. So,
can I just one wee thing before? Like, I think it's important to think about, like, we all lived through COVID, like a seismic species-wide event, you know what I mean? Like within the lifetime of everybody who walks about now, we live through a seismic species level, multi-species level event where we've seen like I'm not taking away from and can't, like the destruction, the deaths of people, the hardship, and also the exploitative manipulation of COVID by mask sellers and all those fucking horror show people, you know, all those parasitical industries and all that to one side. What we also seen was a species-wide mobilisation in the interest of public health. You know what I mean? Like all of humanity in some way involved in an initiative for public health, which is, in my lifetime, we have seen the kind of organising initiative and the scale of it that might be required to respond to species level events. And that's what we're dealing with climate collapse or climate change or environmental destruction. So in knowing that and seeing that and having lived through it, what are the bits that we can pick and pepper out because that's what's going to be required again, but it's entirely possible because we actually just seen it happen. You know what I mean?
Thanks, Seán, and I just want to say thank you to the panel and for everybody coming today. And as I said when we opened, like the golden thread throughout all of the workshops today is decolonisation, and how we combat that is by building a new Ireland and like organising for it in a way that is ambitious, and we have to want more for ourselves, and in order to have that we need to organise for it, and everybody on the left needs to come together, and this is a really great example of how we can start to do that. So thank you so much, and thank you to our panel. Thank you.